How are you?
I'm doing all right. You?
I'm doing okay. How's your family?
Doing fine.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Hey, Haley, how's it going?
Pretty good.
Hey, Paul.
How's it going?
Jack and Kennedy say they can't get onto the meeting for some reason.
Yeah, I just got a thing from Kennedy.
Okay.
Well, there's Jack.
Okay, cool. Problems have been solved.
Even for Kennedy?
It appears not.
Yeah. Let me check in with her. Yep. She was there for a second. Oh, no, there she is. Hey, Kennedy. Can you hear us?
I can.
You can? Okay, cool. All right, awesome. How's everybody doing? Good. Hanging in there. Some of you look like you're getting outside.
Nice.
All right, then let's begin. So we were talking about elephant seals last time and talking about how this LEX system ends up with some elephant seals getting most of the matings and the majority of elephant seals getting very few matings. And this is oftentimes determined by body size. The bigger you are, the better you can defend a territory on the beach. And that territory is what ultimately attracts females. So by controlling territory, you can control access to females. So that's where male-male competition is. But then there's also the issue of female choice. So females have the ability to choose who they want to mate with, and they can avoid mating with some males and choose to mate with other males. And so this is relatively easy to study, assuming that you just have the ability to manipulate whatever the male phenotype is that you think is going to be affecting female choice. So take the male phenotype, either get rid of it or increase it, and then see what happens to that male's mating success. So there's a guy named Malte Anderson who did a bunch of work with widow birds in Africa. And widow birds are these birds with these really long tail feathers. They kind of resemble, in terms of the red wing patch, they kind of resemble North American red-winged blackbirds, but these are from Africa and they have these really long tail feathers. And much in the way tail feathers work in peacocks, they work the same way in widow birds, in that they are they're basically displays intended intended to attract the female. So he did this set of experiments where he basically followed a bunch of widow birds over time and looked at what their mating success was. And before he did anything to them, he found that they didn't really differ very much in mating success. And then some males, he basically essentially left them alone. In other males, he shortened their tail feathers, and in other males, he basically sewed tail extensions onto them. And what happened as a result of this is that mating success in both the shortened ones and the controls went down, and those guys went down because mating success of the male went way up. And so the shortened ones had the lowest mating success, then the controls, then the extended phenotype males had the highest. And so this is what their display looks like when they're flying, and they basically fly up out of the grass and hover there, extending their tail feathers, and then they kind of go back down into the grass. Evidently, those tail feathers cause quite a lot of aerodynamic drag on the birds, so they actually suffer the potential cost of not being able to fly as well with those long tails. So in this case, females are clearly looking at tail length as a phenotypic marker of whether or not they're going to mate with that male. And in this case, it's a totally artificial thing. Those tails aren't those lengths because of genetics. It's because some biologists made those tails the lengths that they are. So these displays have costs, just as combat has potential costs. One of the costs that you could easily imagine for widowbird tails is the risk of predation. If one of the ways that you avoid predation is flying away from a predator, and the tail reduces your ability to do that, then you might experience increased predation risk. You might experience, I don't know, something like lower foraging success. There are a variety of potential costs that could occur. So when we think about female choice, we have to think about, why do females choose males? The most obvious reason is that males might have control of resources. When we were talking about competitive interactions, where we have individuals that are competing for food, for example, you might maintain a territory if food is localized and can be controlled. And if males can control access to resources like food by maintaining a territory, then the female may choose to mate with a male because he has under his control a resource that is necessary for reproduction, that resource being food. So another resource might be parental care. So you might choose a male because of that possibility. Like I mentioned before, territories with better or more resources. Male bullfrogs here in the United States that will start breeding probably here in the next month or so. They have territories that possess areas that impart higher egg survival and fewer parasites. And so territory quality can be more than just having food, can also have, for example, suitable thermoregulatory regime that is good for incubating eggs and whatnot. And then there's this curious thing called nuptial gifts. A nuptial gift is a gift that a male gives to a female that generally keeps her busy while he then copulates with her. And in the case of hanging flies and scorpion flies, the nuptial gifts are food that the hanging fly or the scorpion fly has caught. In the case of things like katydids, the male will excrete a sugar and protein-rich ball of goo that it then offers the female. And then while the female is feeding on whatever that nuptial gift is, whether it's something that the male has caught or if it's something that the male has actually secreted, she will sit there and feed on that gift while the male then copulates with her. And so this is one of the ways in which insects can extend copulation duration. And we've already talked about with dung flies what copulation duration does for a male's reproductive success. So this is a figure from your textbook. As you look at the size of the nuptial gift, there comes a point beyond which the size of the nuptial gift doesn't extend copulation time. So this is kind of, once again, a diminishing returns curve, although it's very linear at the beginning. But the bigger the prey item is, the longer you get to copulate with the female, up to a point after which having larger prey items doesn't necessarily get you more time. But the curious thing is that then duration of copulation has a marked effect on the number of sperm transferred from the male to the female. So the longer you can get her to sit there and let you copulate with her, the better off you're going to be in terms of transferring your sperm to her. And this is presumably why the offering of nuptial gifts has evolved, because the male accrues benefits from having the nuptial gift, which helps extend copulation duration. And then, of course, the female gets the benefit of having this food source that she didn't have to go and find herself. And so in this way, it's kind of a win-win for both of the individuals that are involved in the interaction. So females can choose because of resources. Females also presumably choose because of good genes. This is commonly known in the literature as the good genes hypothesis. So original. But basically, in these cases, the females aren't getting anything other than the sperm offered by the male. So all that the female is presumably getting is access to that male's genes. This is something that happens in bowerbirds. Bowerbirds and birds of paradise are well known for their mating displays. Let's see, I have a book. I think it's in my office. Oh, yeah, there it is. Birds of paradise are crazy birds. Can you see this book? Yep. Anyone? Yes. You guys there? So birds of paradise are one of these groups of birds that advertise at a staged the staging area, and the male does an elaborate courtship dance. In the case of bowerbirds, they actually build a structure called a bower, which is why they're called bowerbirds. It looks like this. The male tends to go around the forest finding articles of a particular color. In the case of the blue bowerbird, which is what this one is, the satin blue bowerbird, you can see that it's got a blue feather. It's got a couple of blue bottle caps. They will fly into junkyards and pick up trash that is of the particular color. They will build a bower, which is an elaborate structure made out of sticks and twigs. The shape of the bower is different from one bowerbird species to another bowerbird species. And then they will decorate the ground around the bower and actually will hang things in the bower that are of a particular color. The color that they prefer is dependent upon the species that you're dealing with. So in the satin blue bowerbird, they tend to collect blue things. They will oftentimes pick away all of the vegetation. So here you can see that there's green vegetation on the ground, but oftentimes they will pick all of that away and get it away so that you just have a patch of dirt with piles of sticks and decorations of items found in the environment that are of a particular color. And then what the male does is the male dances. And so the male will do a dance. In this case, the male will position himself in between the two piles of sticks and will sometimes circle around the stick, coming back into the middle, and basically perform a courtship ritual dance. And as the male is doing this, females will fly by, land, check out the male, and they will either mate with the male or they will go and fly off and look for another male bowerbird. And so presumably, the females are assessing something about the males, and we don't necessarily know what it is. In some cases, in some species, it appears to be the number of ornamentations is important in determining mating success. In some cases, biologists haven't yet figured out what the cue is that females are looking for, but something about their assessment of the male encourages them to either mate with that male or decide to not mate with that male. And once they've mated with the male, they go off and leave. And so they really aren't getting anything from the male other than whatever genes he has passed along. So they don't maintain, the males don't maintain a territory that the females then raise their offspring in or anything like that. They go off and have their offspring on their own. And so presumably, whatever the females are assessing has something to do with male quality. They're making a decision about male quality and then mating with higher quality males and not mating with lower quality males. But like I said, in many cases, we don't know what that criterion is, because there's seemingly nothing in there of value except a dancing male. So if you only get genes, what are the benefits? So R.A. Fisher, who is an evolutionary biologist from the 1920s and 30s and into the 40s, proposed what's known as the sexy son hypothesis. And this idea is that females choose males on the basis of a phenotype, and what they get out of it in the long run is they produce male offspring that also have that particular trait. As a result, their males will be more successful than males that don't have that trait. And so the females are choosing a male partner because that male partner will produce offspring with the same trait that he has. And then the reproductive success of your sons will be enhanced. Because the female choice is also genetically encoded, you find that male trait and female choice end up becoming genetically linked to one another. And so you can have a genetic covariance between male trait and female choice. And what this does is it sets up a situation of runaway selection similar to predator-prey arms race, in that as selection acts on female choice, that female choice acts on male trait. And because male trait is coupled with female choice, those two things begin to evolve in tandem. And so you get choosier and choosier females over time, and you get males with more and more elaborate male traits over time. And that continues in that way, in much the way predator-prey arms races do, until something else happens. One of the things that could happen is that the male trait can become so elaborate that it becomes costly, to the point that the cost of having the male trait actually outweighs the benefits of having that trait. The other thing that can happen is that one or the other of the two species can run out of genetic variation for, in the case of females, the ability to choose, or in the case of males, the quantitative variation in whatever the male trait happens to be. So it's governed in many ways by the same evolutionary dynamics as predator-prey arms races. Sometimes novelty is enough. So this is a study where they put white feathers glued to the heads of finches and presented them to females. And actually, as it turns out, females were more likely to mate with males with a ridiculous white feather glued to their head than they were to normal-looking zebra finches. This is a zebra finch on the left-hand side and another type of finch on the right. And so in this case, these female finches were attracted to nothing more than an individual that looked different from the other individuals in the population. Of course, this was done in a lab setting with a lab colony of zebra finches. But oftentimes, the question that biologists ask is, how did these runaway selection scenarios get started to begin with? And they can get started with nothing more than just a female preference for novelty. So if you look a little different than all of the rest of the males in the population, you are more likely to mate. And because that difference might be genetically based, your offspring will also possess that difference. And because the females preferred that difference, then you're basically off and running in a runaway selection scenario. It's interesting that sometimes novelty is all that it takes. You guys still with me?
Yep.
Yep.
You are so quiet. All right. So this runaway selection process is actually what the McClintock and Ewitts paper is that you are going to be talking about on Monday. So we have this situation with Schizocosa ocreata. So this is a photo of Schizocosa ocreata. It's a small, they don't get much more than about this big around, legs and all. This is a small wolf spider that occurs in the eastern United States. You can find them out at Martha Levitt Thompson. They're coming out this time of year. Schizocosa ocreata is probably the most common wolf spider in my yard. Whenever I'm doing yard work, I always am turning up members of this particular species. And this is a member of a genus, Schizocosa, where there are some species that have male ornamentation on the legs. So this front pair of legs, the other pairs of legs are brown, but this front pair of legs has black pigment. And the tibia, so this is the femur, patella, the tibia, the metatarsus. The tibia has these brushes. And when the males go to mate with a female, the male performs a series of leg waving behaviors that signal to the female, I am a male, I'm a member of your species, I want to mate with you, please don't eat me, is essentially what is happening. Each species has a stereotyped dance pattern, and these have been quantified by a lab at the University of Cincinnati in George Ewitts' lab. And so they have been studying how this system might have evolved. What is the purpose of the tufts? What is the purpose of these courtship dances that the males perform? And the paper basically says, could the male trait have evolved because there was a pre-existing female bias? So we've talked about bias before, but the easiest way to get male elaborate traits is if there's already a bias in the female to be attracted to novelty. In this case, the novelty would be a growth of hairs on your tibia. So they build a phylogeny in that paper, and they show that species, so they did this clever thing back in the 1990s. They filmed spiders doing their courtship dance, male spiders doing their courtship dance, and then they could take and digitally remove the bristles. They could digitally add bristles to the courtship behavior of species that didn't have bristles, and they could also make the bristles of the spiders any size that they wanted. So you could have big bristles, you could have little bristles, you could have no bristles, and you could digitally add bristles to species that didn't previously have bristles in the same way that you could remove them from species that do have bristles. And what they found when they played back these videos to females, females have a stereotypical body posture that they use to indicate that they're receptive to the male. And then at that point, the male knows that he can approach the female without being killed and eaten, which is always a hazard when you're a spider. Spider sex is very hazardous. And that they would look for that stereotypical body posture to see if the female was responding to a videotaped dance. They played these on little tiny video screens from, I don't know if you guys remember these, probably predates you, a little TV Watchman. It's a little handheld TV. It's got like a 2-inch by 2-inch screen, and they basically pulled those apart and mounted the screen on the side of an arena that the female would be in, and then played back these video images to females. And it turns out that females who were from species where the male did not have brushes were more attracted to males with brushes than they were attracted to members of their own species. And they took this as an example of there is a pre-existing female bias for, in this case, the novelty of having brushes. And so that's kind of a general distillation of the paper. Now, in the paper, there are tons of things wrong with this paper. And one of the reasons that I chose the paper is that in many ways it is a fundamentally flawed paper, and we'll discuss the reasons for that on Monday, but this will at least get you started down the path of thinking about that paper. Questions about Schizocosa ocreata? All right. Once again, if you only get genes, what are the benefits? The genes might just be better quality genes than an individual that you passed on in terms of wanting to mate with them. And there are all kinds of benefits that you can have from having a good genetic quality mate rather than a poor genetic quality mate. One guy, an Israeli researcher named Zahavi, proposed in 1975 the handicap hypothesis. And the idea behind this is that the male trait that is being selected by the female, that the female is basing her decisions on, is actually a handicap for survival. So think of widow birds with this really long tail. One of the purposes of that tail might be an advertisement that I have good genes because in spite of this big long tail dragging me down, I'm still here and available for mating, by the way. And so the trait itself may serve as a handicap, and you are only able to display that handicap in its fullest extent if you are of higher genetic quality. This is especially true when you have things like disease resistance. So oftentimes females prefer the male trait because it's an honest indicator of something. And we see this when we look at red-winged blackbirds, for example. Red-winged blackbirds have this red patch on the side of their wing. And as it turns out, if you are parasitized and you still display the full coloration of that, it basically is once again a badge that indicates that even though I'm physiologically compromised because I'm carrying a high parasite load, but I can still display this patch vibrantly. That then is seen by females as an example, as an honest signal of genetic quality, as opposed to a male that can't continue to display that patch under those conditions, will have a duller patch, and so it's an easy indicator of males' ability to fend off the negative effects of parasitism. This becomes important in birds because birds actually are well known for having a lot of blood-sucking parasites that occur on them. This is why you should never pick up bird nests that you find out in nature, because oftentimes you'll find inside of them little bugs in the order Hemiptera, which are blood-sucking parasites. So stay away from bird nests. So the Zahavi handicap hypothesis, I can display the signal because I am in this case resistant to the parasite. Very few studies have actually tested this genetic covariance between female preference and male trait. One of the cases where it has been studied is in the stalk-eyed flies. This is work done by a research group at the University of Maryland in Southeast Asia. There are these flies that have their eyes mounted on these really long stalks. When males, this is actually a male about to copulate with a female, but when males come up against one another, they will basically put their heads together, and the contest is basically who has the wider eye gap. And this guy sees that this guy has a wider eye gap, and this guy will be like, okay, you win, you get to keep your territory. these guys maintain territories on wooden stalks that have nectaries. So there is a resource availability issue functioning here, and that the females will mate with males that have territories with nectaries in them, but your ability to maintain that territory is determined strictly by male-male competition of this eye stalk length. And as it turns out, Wilkinson, Gerard Wilkinson is the guy who's done this work. It turns out that female choice is strongest in those females that also produce males with really wide eye stalks. And so it's one of the few situations where they've actually seen a genetic covariance between female preference and male trait. And that's one of the necessary conditions for having this runaway selection scenario that Fisher proposed.
Will you say the finding again? I missed it.
I'm sorry, what was that?
You said they found something, but I was busy writing other things down and I missed it.
Oh yeah, so what they found was that females that are choosier are also females that will produce males with wider eye stalks. So there is a genetic covariance between the female preference and the male trait in this particular system. And that's one of the preconditions that you have to have in order for Fisher's runaway selection scenario to operate.
What is the benefit of having wider eyes other than just, okay, that makes you more dominant? Like, what is the benefit?
Presumably, I can't think of a benefit. The benefit in this case really is your ability to get a mate. And so this is very much a sexually selected trait. You can imagine that as those eyes get further and further away, it impairs your ability to see effectively because you no longer have overlapping fields of vision.
Mm-hmm.
You have big blind spots behind you because this eye is seeing mainly over here. This eye is seeing mainly over here. So you have a blind spot in front of you and you have a huge blind spot behind you. And so I can think of lots of reasons why you would not want to have your eyes mounted on these stalks. So yeah, presumably, what's that?
Yeah, I was saying, yeah, that makes more sense. I would agree that you wouldn't want it.
Yeah, so presumably female choice is strong enough that selection on male stalk length is stronger than any negative selection against stalk length.
Gotcha.
And so there are two forms of selection. Two forms of selection that you see in the literature sometimes referred to. One of them is viability selection, which is just another way of saying survival. You know, selection that acts on you, but it's acting on your ability to survive, versus sexual selection, which is acting on your ability to reproduce. And in this case, there may be viability selection that is acting on eye stalk lengths such that stalk lengths would be negative. But in this case, sexual selection must be acting more strongly to increase stalk length. Otherwise, you would have stalk lengths getting shorter over time rather than getting longer over time.
What was viability selection again?
Your ability to survive, be viable. So let's say that those eye stalks make you more likely to be preyed upon. That's negative selection against stalk length because males with shorter eye stalks should be able to avoid predation more than ones with long eye stalks. But that selection must be weaker than the sexual selection acting to increase stalk length. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stalk-eyed flies. Or the stalks would be shorter than they actually are.
Would
And
this also
they're quite long.
would this also be an example of the handicap hypothesis? Because they have these long stalks and they're surviving anyway? Even though it might
Possibly. I've not seen Wilkinson talk about these in that way, but certainly you can make that argument. Other questions about stalk-eyed flies? somewhere there is a picture of me dressed as a stalk-eyed fly at a Halloween party of mainly biologists in Puerto Rico. And so I have PVC pipes going out to balls that I painted red mounted onto my head. And
That's a good look.
It is a very sexy look, actually, so I've been told. All right. So in the same way that females can exercise female choice, there are some cases in which males can exercise choice about females. And this only occurs a limited number of times out in nature, but almost always when it occurs, it's because males contribute significantly to reproduction, either by providing resources or parental care or whatever it might be. And so when male contribution to parental care and reproduction gets big enough, there becomes an incentive for males to be choosy about females because they're now investing sufficiently in reproduction to make that choice important in an evolutionary sense. And so that investment has to be greater than whatever the female's investment would be. And so sometimes you end up with just as much female choice acting on males as females. Oftentimes you'll see a lack of sexual dimorphism in phenotypes that are only expressed during the breeding season. And in some extreme cases, it can lead to sexual role reversal to the point that the females act more typically male and the males are acting more typically female when we look at the broader diversity of male-female behavior in things like investment in reproduction, parental care, etc. So it's similar to the process that happens in males. If males are in short supply or contribute heavily to reproductive success, females might have to compete for access to males. So in this case, even though males can produce tons of sperm, there are few enough males that sperm becomes a limiting resource. Males then choose among the females for those likely to have the highest fitness, those that produce more eggs or produce better offspring. So now you have male choosiness, and you, in cases of sexual role reversal, you might have females that are, exhibit flashy colors and things like this during breeding season. So females may mate with multiple males as a result of this sexual role reversal, but we also see females even in situations where there isn't a role reversal. We oftentimes see females mating with multiple males. One of the things that this does for females is it can increase the amount of resources that she has available to them. If she mates with multiple males, each male may think that they have a certain proportion of the offspring that are theirs, and as a result may be willing to share resources with that female because they have some chance of paternity in the offspring that she has produced. So a female mating with a single male, he has great assurance that those are his. If she's only mated with a single male, but if you've mated with multiple males, you have the opportunity to essentially convince multiple males that they have paternity. And if they then allow you to feed in their territory as a result of that, then you have many more resources potentially available to you. So it increases the probability of parental care. And the other thing that we've talked about in the past, this possibility of infanticide, if one of the things that can be done by a male to increase their own reproductive success is to kill off the offspring that are already there, if there's a possibility that some of those offspring are his, he's less likely to engage in infanticide because there's a probability that at least some of those offspring are the males. So sexual role reversal occurs in things like pipefishes. Pipefishes are related to seahorses. They're all in the same family, the Cymatidae. So pipefishes and seahorses have males performing parental care. As it turns out, females can produce multiple clutches in the time that it takes to incubate a single clutch. So as a result, they basically produce a clutch of eggs, they hand it off to the male fertilizes it, and then the male performs parental care. And then the female goes off, generates another clutch, mates with another male, drops the eggs off at that male, and she can, because she can produce eggs very quickly, because she has a small body size and also produces small sized eggs, she can pop off lots of different clutches in a short period of time, which she wouldn't be able to do if she was saddled with the task of parental care. So females in this case increase fitness by increasing the number of males she mates with, in the same way that traditional systems have males maximizing their fitness by mating with multiple females. And so this is the classic situation where you would expect to see sexual role reversal, because in this case, males are a limiting resource. And so the females want to take advantage of the male limiting resource by mating with as many males as they can find. They'll compete with one another for access to those males, etc. Katydids. Sexual role reversal can be influenced by environmental conditions. When food is limited, sexual role reversal as male spermatophore provides a limiting resource. And so females will compete with males because males offer a nuptial gift, which is rich in sugar and protein. And so whenever food is limited, that becomes very important for female reproductive success. And so they compete for access to the spermatophore being offered by the male. And the spermatophore is basically a ball of goo that has a little plug of sperm on top of it. And they get the way it works in katydids. I should have put a picture in here that shows this. The spermatophore basically operates as a mating plug also, which we'll talk about when we get to sexual conflict. Let's go to so when the male goes to mate, he basically puts his sperm in association with a big ball of goo. The sperm are then transferred to the female, and then the female turns around and basically feeds on the external part of the spermatophore. Here you can see one doing it right here. This is the female. You can tell she's a female because she has this long ovipositor. This is the male. He's deposited the spermatophore here at her genital opening. The sperm are basically entering the female while she feeds on the nutrient and energy-rich food source that is the spermatophore. And so that's how it operates in that system. Because of that food resource, when food is limited, that becomes important for female reproductive success, and so they will compete for access to males. When food is not limited, there is no sexual role reversal, as males cannot provide a limiting resource. And so the males produce little tiny spermatophores, they produce them quickly, and they take on a more male role of investing less in reproduction and trying to spread that reproduction around as many females as possible. So in some cases, sexual reversal may be environmentally dependent.
Could you define sexual reversal or sexual role reversal? Is that just when
males act more like a typical female and females act more like a typical male?
Okay.
So the norm out there in nature is females invest heavily in reproduction. Males don't invest heavily in reproduction. As a result, male reproductive success is determined by how many females they mate with. Females' reproductive success flatlines after the first mating, and so they tend to not take on multiple male partners. If they do, it's because they accrue some benefit from it, and they also tend to be choosier about the individuals that they mate with. When males are limited, so the whole basis of that scenario is that females produce a limited supply of high energy resources, which are eggs. As a result, males compete for access to those eggs. When there's a situation where males are limited, then they become the limiting resource for reproduction. You might have sex roles reversed, or when males provide a resource that is crucial to the reproductive success of the female, in the case of this case, a spermatophore or a nuptial gift or something like that, the females may have a sexual role reversal and the males will also, such that the resource that the male possesses or creates is in limiting supply to the point that females will once again compete for access to males because of either their rarity or resource availability.
Okay. Thanks.
In some cases, this happens in birds, and normally we think of birds where the male is the flashier, more colorful of the two members of the species, and they are doing courtship dances and things like this to attract the attention of females. But in some birds where there is sexual role reversal, that sexual dimorphism is actually reversed also, and it's the male that is drably colored and it's the female that is brightly colored. But once again, those sexual role reversals are the exception, which is why we refer to it as a role reversal, because it's reversed from what the norm is. And this is interesting, because when we think about human sexuality, we define everything relative to the heteronormative, and so we look at what the kind of what's been perceived in the past as the normal situation, and then describe everything in reference to that. Animal behaviorists do the same thing with role reversal. What is if you look at all of the species, what is the typical male behavior? What is the typical female behavior? Well, then these are the conditions under which those behaviors are reversed. So how should you think about sexual selection? And this is one of the hardest things. When we get to the chapter on mating systems, we're going to actually integrate information about resource availability and defensibility, about the availability and defensibility of females, and about the necessity of males having to contribute to parental care in order to have successful reproduction occur. And these three factors, one of which we talked about in the last chapter, one of which we're talking about now, which is the availability of one sex versus the other sex, and what we'll talk about a little later when we talk about sexual conflict and the differing goals of males and females in recruiting the other partner into things like parental care. All of these things come together in the mating system chapter, so that if you know about the availability and distribution of resources, you know about the availability and distribution of the different sexes, and you know something about the necessity of parental care, you can predict what kind of mating system you will have. That's the next chapter, but it depends on knowledge from the last couple of chapters. And so if we can start you thinking now in productive ways about how to think about sexual selection, that will help you in the mating system chapter. So let's go back to the original idea. What increases fitness for a given individual? More matings, perhaps, if you're a male, being choosier if you are a female. The answer to this question, if it's more matings, then you'll be more promiscuous. If your fitness is enhanced by being choosier, then you will tend to be not promiscuous. And promiscuous in just a descriptive way, not a negative way. Promiscuous as used by animal behaviorists is just, do you have more than one sexual partner or not? And so we don't make value judgments about a bird, a male bird that has sex with lots of female birds. That male bird is promiscuous, but it's just a description of its mating habits. So when you think about what increases fitness, that then tells you about what the behavior of that individual is going to be. If more matings makes you more fit, then you will tend to seek out more matings. If being choosier makes you more fit, then you will basically try to mate with as few individuals as possible and be careful about who those individuals are. Now, these general rules can be applied, but you always have to examine the specifics of any system to predict what you would expect to happen. And like I said, when we get to mating systems, where we talk about monogamy versus promiscuity versus serial monogamy, et cetera, you have to look beyond just this single question to make good predictions about what you would expect to see in any given mating system. But at least keeping these two central questions in front of you will be useful. So there's also sperm competition. If females mate with multiple males, there are sperm inside the female from multiple males, and there can actually be competition among sperm for access to the female ova. This is what we talked about when we were talking about the hanging flies and why copulation duration is important. The more sperm of a previous males that you can displace as the current male, the better off you're going to be from the standpoint of increasing your success in sperm competition. So sexual selection even continues after the act of mating because you have things like sperm competition occurring. So when we think about females mating with multiple males, we might ask, why would a female mate with multiple males if her fitness is actually enhanced by mating with fewer males? And one of the reasons is that the cost of resisting multiple males is just too high. And so they acquiesce because they don't really have any choice in the matter. It could be that females receive material direct benefits as a result of multiple matings. We've talked about this with females that mate with multiple males. It confuses the paternity issue. There's some chance that at least some of their offspring, of the offspring of a particular female, are yours, and as a result, you will give direct material benefits to the female because at least some of those offspring are possibly yours. These benefits could be food in the form of spermatophores or nuptial gifts, could be mating sites, could be protection from predators, anything material that a female would find beneficial could fall into this category. Then there are these genetic benefits, that your book refers to as indirect genetic benefits. Monogamous species, as it turns out, are not really monogamous. So monogamous species, so species of birds and things like this that we would normally think of as monogamous, when you start looking at the parentage of offspring that are produced, you find that monogamous species engage in 10 to 40% extra pair matings. And once again, an extra pair mating is just a mating that is done outside what's viewed as kind of the primary monogamous coupling. There's a correlation between plumage dimorphism and rates of extra pair mating, and it should be kind of predictable that the flashier you are in terms of plumage dimorphism, as it goes up, the probability of extra pair bonding is also going to go up. And so, once again, you would expect a large sexual dimorphism to occur in situations where males are brightly colored because they're competing for a limited number of females, and as a result, males are going to be wanting to mate with as many females as possible, which means that it's likely that any given female will have mated with more than one male.
Can you explain the circles? Because I was confused by this in the book.
Oh yeah, so the circles are basically, so the mating system is, do you have 0 mates, 1 mate, 2 mate, or 3 mates? And then in that system, what's the degree of sexual dimorphism? And the sizes of the circles are the number of instances of it. The more instances you have, the bigger the circle is. This is sometimes referred to as a bubble diagram in statistics. So there are lots of individuals where there's very little plumage dimorphism because you're monogamous, essentially. And then as the extra pair bonding goes up, that tends to be correlated with sexual dimorphism between the two sexes. species with more colorful males generally have more extra pair bonding, as
Wouldn't
revealed by
you-
paternity tests.
But like even in the 0 and 10, 20, etc., like there's still circles up high. You know what I mean?
There
Like,
are.
I don't see
So
trends.
the general trend is this direction here. So this is a tau statistic. This is a type of correlation coefficient. And the general trend is you're going from the lower box here to the upper box here. It's being pulled up. Let's see, can I draw? I can't draw. I can draw.
Okay. So it really
Didn't
only
even go this way.
matters.
You have some things that are high, even though you have some sexually dimorphic species that have low extra bond paternity, but generally speaking, as you get more extra pair bond paternity, you also get more sexual dimorphism. So it's certainly
why
not. What's that?
Why? Why is that true?
Well, when you think about organisms that have high sexual dimorphism, that's generally because the male is brightly colored. The reason that males are brightly colored is because they're competing for the attention of females. Females are the limiting resource, and so males are going to be trying to mate with as many females as possible, which increases the likelihood that those females will also have mated with more than one male, because there simply aren't enough females to go around.
Okay.
In that first graph, why wouldn't you expect to see like a large bubble up where for like social mating system on 3 partners, there's only 2 rather small bubbles. Why wouldn't you expect to see a larger bubble more up towards the greater plumage dimorphism?
Because this occurs in a situation where these are the most sexually dimorphic species out there, and as the degree of sexual dimorphism increases, the total number of species that you have is small.
Gotcha. But generally the trend is still that with greater number of social mating systems, you have greater plumage dimorphism?
Yep. This graph here is probably the more important graph to think about of the 2 of these in this particular figure.
Okay.
And I can't remember why I talked about why I had an Antechinus stewarti situation in here, and I just didn't have time to go and look about it. So we'll just forget this for now.
Is that
I'm
the
sure.
little from it? I think the book talked about how it only mates once and then dies. So like,
Is that the situation? My last couple of days have been a little chaotic, so I didn't get a chance to go and look at this one.
yeah, it's like towards the end, right before sexual conflict, and it talks about like, I guess they're a special case because they just die. So they like, I can't remember exactly what it said, but I remember reading about it.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. Brown Antechinus, marsupial-like mammal from Australia, has eliminated this confounding factor. Which counts? Da, 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 da. Oh yeah, she only has 1 litter in her lifetime, after which she dies. Males are simulparous. Simulparous just basically means that you live your life and then you reproduce, and then after you reproduce, you die. And that's as opposed to heteroparity, where you reproduce multiple times throughout your life. So for fancy pants, so you can prove to your parents that you're actually learning something in college. You can trot out the terms simulparity and heteroparity. So simulparity means you reproduce once and then you die. Iterative parity means that you reproduce multiple times before dying. Da, 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 da. I'm reading the thing. Yeah, so this is just another one of the situations where it really is all about the genes. So they mated these little marsupials with multiple males, and then they let them out into the environment. But they also had individuals that they let mate with a single male multiple times. And as it turns out, those individuals that had mated with multiple males, after 6 months or after 3 months, 2 months later, they went and looked at which offspring survived the most because they had microchipped them, and they found that individuals that had mated with multiple males tended to have higher survivorship of offspring than when you only mated with a single male. And presumably that was because you had more sperm diversity going into fertilizing those polyandrous females' litters, and the ones that had poor viability ended up dying, leaving the ones with good viability still surviving, as opposed to when you mated with only a single male, you only had that male's genes, and if that male's genes were not very good, your entire litter died as a result. And so this is an example of where polyandry results in you kind of hedging your bets in terms of getting good quality offspring without you having to exercise a ton of choice. And so rather than choosing poorly, you basically choose to mate with a variety of males, and so you're kind of running a genetic lottery. So why not go for, so this, it gets at the question, why not just go for the best male to begin with? And it may be that there's high competition for males, in which case the best males may already be taken, and so you are kind of stuck with what you get if you're a female. You might have a poor social mate and rely on extra pair matings for increasing the genetic quality of your offspring. And so what kinds of things limit extra pair matings? Lower inputs of parental care by cuckolded males. So if you are a male and you suspect that the female that you've mated with is engaging in extra pair matings, you might basically just say, I'm not going to invest in parental care because I know some of those offspring are not mine. And since we're almost done with time, I'll just tell you an anecdote from my early history. After I got my PhD, I moved to Peru and did research with my wife at the time. I lived there for 3.5 months. And when I came back, we had $13.49 in the bank. And I needed to get a job because she was still working on her PhD. And while I was finished with mine, I didn't have an academic position because I went with her to Peru to work on her doctoral dissertation with her. So I needed to find a job. And so a friend of mine said, oh, there's the genetic testing facility over in Dallas that is looking for people. So I went over there and they're like, what experience do you have doing molecular genetics? I'm like, I don't have any experience doing molecular genetics. I'm an ecologist. And they were like, well, why should we hire you? I said, well, I'm a PhD, which means I'm infinitely trainable. They're like, that's really not much of a benefit as far as we can see. I said, okay, I guarantee you that I'll learn everything that there is to know about this job, and I'll learn it faster than any of your people that you've hired in the past. And if I don't, after a week, fire me. And so I went and they trained me, and I learned how to do paternity testing using a restriction fragment linked polymorphism analysis. And I learned it really, really fast, and they kept me on. And so there was this lab in Dallas, and they did paternity testing that was being sent to them for legal cases. And so all of these cases, when you get a divorce and your claim for getting a divorce is that you that your spouse has been unfaithful, and or you are the male and you're trying to get out of paying alimony and child support to your spouse that you're divorcing, and you basically say, why should I pay child support to this woman when those children are not even mine? This gets to the issue that we were just talking about. A couple of things that I learned in the process of doing this job for 6 months, which is how long I did it until I got my first academic position. Men are terrible human beings, because of all the cases that came through the lab, a small handful of them actually showed that there was multiple paternity of the offspring. And so in a small handful of cases, there were biological justification for denying child support. In most cases, the males in the relationship were the father of all the children. So guys, if you're getting divorced and you want to get out of paying child support, don't waste your time on the genetic test. Chances are those kids are yours. The other thing that I discovered is that lots of people are trying to get out of paying child support. We had 3 teams of biologists there, and each day, each team, every 3 days, a team would get 600 cases, and they handled cases from California, Louisiana, Florida, Arizona, and the southern half of California. So those 5.5 states provided this lab with about 1,800 cases a week of people getting divorced and dudes trying to get out of paying child support. It was depressing, quite frankly. And so this goes back to the last slide that we're talking about. When we think about extra pair matings, is when individuals engage in extra pair matings, it might actually result in the lack of parental care by the cuckolded males. And the example of this in humans is dudes trying to get out of paying child support. So, and with that, we're out of time. Questions?
No, can you hang on after everybody gets off? Haley and I are going to figure out when to meet with you on Thursday.
Sure. Kennedy, do you and Alexis want to talk about the literature summary?
I had planned on Friday.
Oh, you had planned on Friday. Okay. I didn't know if your after class thing was after class today or after class some other day.
Yeah, if Friday's after class is okay, that would be better for me.
That's fine. That's fine. All right. Let me talk to you guys first. And Alexis, let me just close this meeting, and then I'll get back to you when I'm done with Luke and Haley. I can't hear you, Alexis. You are muted.
Oh, so are you just gonna start a new meeting, or are you gonna call me, or what?
I'll just start a new meeting.
Okay.
I'll drop you.
Cool.
I'll drop you an email saying we're starting now, and then you can just log back on.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Bye.